Okay, let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so very thankful for the time that we have to study your word and to study Adventist history. And we just invite your Holy Spirit as we look at Snow's letters. We know, Lord, that it's a lot of information. So we ask that your Holy Spirit can enlighten our minds and help us to understand the significance of these things. Thank you for hearing our prayer and be with each one. And we invite your presence here. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I did email, I think I did, this to everyone, the chart. So some people might want to look at it on their own computer rather than look on it on the screen, depending what kind of device you have, because you can zoom in. But I'm going to try to zoom in to the different parts. Now, I also sent you a file which is, instead of the whole Three Angels Messages source book, I sent you the Three Angels Messages source book, which just has the Midnight Cry section from it. So just that chapter. And that's what we're going to be looking at. So I have it queued up just from the whole book, but so my pagination might be different. And what we're looking at here with this chart is simply, just to explain it in a general sense, what I did is I took Samuel Snow's letters on the top left here, and these are his letters in 1842, 1843, and 1844 that were published. And I spent a lot of time digging through all these different periodicals, which some of them are in pretty rough shape in their, to search them, it's pretty difficult, because they're not always well converted into text. So it is possible that I missed some letter of Samuel Snow because I didn't read every single periodical article from 1942 or 1842 to 1844. But I did go through lots of them, and I did all kinds of different ways of searching. And so as far as I know, this is all of the letters that were published from 1842 to 1844, where Samuel Snow is the author. And this would include letters and articles. So often, I guess his articles mostly were just letters to the editor. So usually to Southard or someone like that. And I numbered them, and I'm not sure why the number 3 is missing over here. So I probably should put a number 3 there. I don't know what happened there. Let's put a number 3 here. There we go.
Why do you need a 3 there?
Because it's the third letter.
Don't worry. Sorry.
So the first letter we got from Snow, it's November 3rd, 1842. And it's in Heinz Signs of the Times. November 16th, 1842 is when it's published. So it's going to be published 13 days after it was written. And the significance of these letters, we're not going to read them all the way through. But if we go here to Midnight Cry in Three Angels Messages sourcebook, of course, we're going to have Ellen White's article first about the Midnight Cry. And then this is the first letter. And he's talking about the fact that he has been doing some meetings. I've given a course of lectures in Sturbridge, and since then have been in Brattleboro and Vernon, Vermont, and Green River, etc. So he's just talking about his work. So this is the first letter that he ever has published. He recently come into the movement, and decided to do some preaching. He says, "Oh, my dear brother, our time of labor and toil and waiting for the bridegroom is short. The glorious kingdom of eternal rest is at the door, a few short months, and we shall be in full possession of eternal life and blessedness." So in this letter here, I mean, it's not much to it, but you can see that they are looking for the bridegroom. So at that time, in 1842, they're understanding the parable of the 10 virgins. And notice that he says, "It rejoices my heart exceedingly that God blesses this preaching of the midnight cry." So you can see that another reference to the parable of the 10 virgins. Now, as far as the date itself, what I did in the chart, and it was just for information purposes, I did put what I discerned to be the biblical date. And I haven't gone through and checked this on our calendar converter. Now, the calendar converter that Troy Van Horn made isn't always accurate when it comes to dates that are like the 8th month, 9th month, 10th month, etc., in that he doesn't adjust those for the actual observance of the new moon. So that is the biblical calendar. The first 7 months, the starts of them, once you get the first month, they're fixed as 30, 29, 30, 29, 30, 29 days. The 7th month, whether it's going to be 30 or 29 days, depends upon the observance of the new moon for the start of the 8th month. So the 7th month could be 29 days, just like the 6th month is, but often it is 30, more often than being 29. But there's no way of creating a calculator that's going to do that I know of, at least not easily. So the easiest way is for me is to just go and check it out on the Torah calendar, and there I can see the new moon sightings in Jerusalem as long as the conditions were good. So that's why I have that biblical date there. So the 29th day of the 7th month should be correct for 1842. And the one that's going to be interesting, though, is the third letter, the 4th day of the 9th month, December 7th, 1842. And I also have some other dates underneath that. So when it says 977 BC, November 22nd, 1 Kings 13, verse 1 to 5, the 15th day of the 8th month. I don't have a 15th day of the 8th month above there, but I do have that it's November 22nd. And you can see his second letter is November 22nd. It happens to be the 18th day of the 8th month. So that's going to be interesting as well. So some of these dates, November 3rd, November 6th, 12th day of the 8th month, none of those things seem to be significant that I know of. But the November 22nd date for his second letter and the December 7th date, which is the 4th day of the 9th month, which is an inversion of the 9th day of the 4th month. Plus, you can see in 518 BC, Zechariah has this date. So we'll look at this in a bit more detail. But you can see I'm putting these dates here because I'm comparing events in these prophecies that are connected to Millerite history. And so a lot of these are not major sort of waymarks or anything, but they are indications that there's some kind of connection between the dividing of the kingdom, where you have Jeroboam on the 15th day of the 8th month on November 22nd, 977 BC. And so I would look at Samuel Snow's initial letters, at least having some connection to these biblical dates. So I don't know how interesting this is to everyone, how much you're going to remember of it, but I think it would be useful if people spent some time looking up the references on their own and also reading the letters. So again, we're not going to read through the letters in detail. So when we look at his second letter, this is the one that's published on December 7th, 1842. And I think is that the second letter? That's the third letter. So I'm not sure why they're not in order. So this is the third letter, December 7th, 1842. Now in here, he's going to talk about the feasts, and the main thing here is that he's going to talk about this idea that there's going to come a prophet to the movement. And he quotes this verse that says, I will also speak by prophets, and I will multiply visions and use similitudes by the ministry of prophets. It seems to me very evident that this should be the rendering from the fact that the verse is by the word also connected back with the preceding verse, which is in the future tense, so that both these verses may be considered referring to a future time. So the idea is not, I have also spoken, but I will also speak by the prophets. So he's taking this idea that this is going to be future, that God's going to speak by the prophets. Now, one of the things that I find by reading through Snow's material, especially the stuff after October 22nd, 1844, that even back here, he is believing, or at least somehow connected with the idea that he might be that prophet. So that is Samuel Snow, even though God used him, had something about him, a seed in him, that's going to grow to the idea that eventually he's going to be the prophet Elijah after October 22nd, 1844. And this seed is going to be planted in some of his early writings and the fact that he ends up, being responsible for the midnight cry, that goes to his head a bit, right? So he starts to believe that he is a prophet. And this is a very dangerous thing. This happened to other people in this movement. And it's not a safe thing to consider. Because even if God does give somebody light, what would be the point of having somehow being recognized as a prophet, or even thinking of yourself as a prophet?
You're taking credit away from God to yourself.
Right, because it's God who has been leading this movement. And there's not an individual that God had to have in order to do this. That he happens to use us, that we can be thankful for. But we can't say, God had to have us. And the prophets in the past weren't proud about being prophets. But nowadays, maybe not so much in Adventism, but in a lot of churches, there are people who become prophets and they get a following. And mostly it's just to manipulate other people. And so we should have no room for that type of idea, that type of authority, that somebody becomes a prophet. Now, we could argue, Ellen White was a prophet and she had that responsibility, but it's not something that she wanted. And she tried not to use that authority of a prophet to settle issues, right? So even something like the daily, which I believe is a major issue, if Ellen White had stepped in and just settled the issue with her authority as the prophet, would it have benefited Adventism?
No,
Why not?
because it really wouldn't clear the issue or lack thereof. It would just be a look at me kind of thing.
Well, it would also put it underground a bit.
Well, for sure.
Because God's tried that in the past, and it doesn't stop rebellion. So the only way that this work is ever going to be completed is if, as individuals, we seek God ourselves and we don't follow man.
Exactly.
And so once you have somebody who has that position of authority, and we even saw it with Jeff, not that Jeff, I'm not blaming Jeff in any sense, but people would basically acquiesce their responsibility. to Jeff. So Jeff would end up having the final say on what they thought. And the problem with that is a lot of people who were following Jeff, once Jeff passed the cloak, so to speak, to Parminder, they just blindly followed Parminder.
Mhm.
And once they were following Parminder, he could plant a prophetic narrative that they couldn't listen to Jeff anymore, that Jeff was dead. And they just cut themselves off from the movement completely and just follow Parminder and Tess. So you can see the danger here. So this is something I find interesting about Snow. And the danger, why anybody would want to claim to be Samuel Snow, when you consider where he ended up, I don't think would be something that I would want to do as a person in this movement, to say that I'm Snow. And of course, we do say this movement is Snow. But this movement, has it made some of the same mistakes that Snow made? Okay, that's what happened there. So has this movement made the same mistakes that Snow has made? And how would we describe that? Now I'm trying to sort this out, so hang on. While you're thinking about this, I'm going back to this chart. I got to make sure that I understand this properly. Okay, so I see what I did wrong. Restoration of Israel, 1843. So I shouldn't have put this third here. What do I have here? I made some mistake with this chart. I got to figure this out. So it's actually his second letter is written November 22nd, and it's published on December 3rd. And then he has a May 11th. And I don't have that on here. May 11th, 1843. Oh, that's going to be his. Okay, I see what I did wrong. So this is his second letter. This third one here is not on here. So that is correct. I just didn't put the 1843 one in here. I'm not sure why. So when we look at Snow, can we say that this movement has made the same mistake as Snow, and that some aspect of this movement has represented what Snow became? Can anybody think of what that would be? What about the Omega? How do we place the Omega in this movement, in context of this movement being Samuel Snow? Does Snow have two aspects to him? Does he have an alpha and an omega aspect? People understand what I'm getting at? Anybody following my train of thought?
It would seem that he has an alpha and omega, yes.
Okay. So could we say that, because remember, Tess was proclaimed to be Samuel Snow by Jeff. Does anybody remember that?
Yeah, I remember that.
Okay. So can we say that Tess and Parminder represent Samuel Snow?
Yeah, I would say so.
in his omega sense. That is, because they basically did the same thing that Snow did. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they started off, you know, uh, presenting some truths, and then ended up taking credit to themselves, I guess.
Yeah. And we can see it starts in Snow prior to 1844. And we can see that this is starting with Parminder and Tess early on, before the first disappointment, which we would mark as November 9th. So there is this aspect of Parminder and Tess that would relate to at least that part of the movement. The Omega movement would take on the characteristics of Snow's negative side. That's the way that I would interpret it. So that Samuel Snow doesn't represent a person, he represents a movement. But he represents two aspects of this movement, the alpha aspect and the omega aspect. That seemed like a fair interpretation. Anybody with,
I can see that.
okay. Anyone else with thoughts on it? Because we have to have some way to explain Parminder and Tess from Millerite history. Now, remember when we studied about Sister Minor? What was she involved in? Does anybody remember prior to October 20?
She had something to do with about Jerusalem.
Yeah, okay, that was later. So later on, she's going to return to Old Jerusalem. But,
Yeah, right.
but in Philadelphia, there was this group of fanatics that went out prior to October 22nd, 1844, into the country. And they created quite a stir and created a negative view of the Adventists, because the Adventists were free from fanaticism.
So the Watertown fanatics.
Well, there's the Watertown fanatics, but that's a different group as well. But there is this group that, because the Watertown fanatics, that's at Exeter, I believe, at the Exeter camp meeting. But
That
when
was
you get,
after the
yeah,
latter part.
yeah. So there was this doctor, I can't remember his name, but some kind of doctor, and Sister Minor was part of that that group. Now, Sister Minor is a follower of Samuel Snow's, right? So she, remember, we looked at on that the May 2nd letter, when it's published by Samuel Snow, that Sister Minor has an article in the Midnight Cry entitled "The Midst of the Week." So Sister Minor and Snow were connected. So there's this connection here, whether it's a man and a woman, whether it's inverted in our time that Tess is Snow and Parminder is Sister Minor. I don't know. I don't think I would try to break it down to individuals necessarily. But we did have Tess being labeled as Samuel Snow by Jeff. And so there is some truth to that. That's the way that I would look at it. But that fanaticism that Sister Minor was connected to and that Snow was connected to, that's manifest in our movement with Parminder and Tess and the Omega. That's the way that I would interpret it. Because we have to have something in Millerite history that parallels what we experienced in some way. At least that's, whether how much detail the parallel is, that's another question I don't necessarily have the answer to. But anyway, looking at these, so we got his second letter. His third letter, so his second letter is written November 22nd and published December 7th. So that to me becomes really interesting because it connects these two verses, the November 22nd, 15th day of the 8th month, Jeroboam offering at the altar in Bethel, and that's the prophecy of Josiah is given then. And then we have December 7th, which is the 4th day of the 9th month in 518 BC. So that's Zechariah 7 verse 1, and I guess technically it's verse 5 as well. If I remember correctly, I should look that up. Zechariah chapter 7. So in Zechariah chapter 7, yeah, it's the 4th year of King Darius in the 4th day of the 9th month, right? And yeah, and then in verse 5, it's going to talk about the 70 years. So it's the 4th day of the 9th month, which is Kislev. So the significance of December 7th. What is the significance of December 7th as well?
You mean in our movement?
Well,
Or
not so much in our movement, but December 7th in history. How about,
Combination.
what's that?
I was going to say it's a combination of 12 and 7.
Okay, it's a combination of 12 and 7, which is interesting. It's also Pearl Harbor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also my first wife. It was her birthday, so significance of that. My mom, who passed away on Friday, her birthday was August 6th, which is, I always connect August 6th and December 7th. To me, I always see the bombing of Hiroshima as connected to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. But, I mean, I guess historically that would be correct. But we have this December 7th, which is the 12th month, the 7th day. So that becomes a symbol of? What does the 12 and the 7 mean? Because there's lots of different significances we can attach to that. But just to remind people. Because they're the numbers on the top right-hand corner of the 1843 chart. 7 times 12 equals 84. Times 30 is 2520. So 12 and 7 to me are connected to the 2520 on the 1843 chart. They also represent the 12 and the 70. They also represent the fact that a metonic cycle of 19 years has 12 regular years and 7 embolismic years. And there's other connections we could make as well. Now, the 4th day of the 9th month. Now we know the 9th day of the 4th month is the date that the walls of Jerusalem were broken down. So can we take this inversion of the 4th day in the 9th month, of the 9th day of the 4th month? Can we see that they're connected? Because we have other examples of inversions of dates. So the walls of Jerusalem being broken down, can we equate that in any way with what happened on December 7th, 1941 as a symbol?
did you say the walls of Jerusalem, you said?
Yeah, so the walls of Jerusalem were broken down in 586. This is a month before the temple is destroyed.
Okay.
And that date is July 18th in 586 BC.
Seems to have a connection there.
Yeah, so we have all these little connections of these dates, and they're not just like one connection, there's these multiple connections. And then we can also see in Zechariah, he's addressing the destruction of the temple or the rebuilding of the temple, and the period of 70 years from the destruction of the temple in 586 to its restoration that's going to be coming at the end of 70 years. So obviously the destruction of the temple on the 10th day of the 5th month is connected to Jerusalem being the siege ending on the 9th day of the 4th month. So we also have the 49 there as well, 4th day, 9th month. So we have all these little connections in the dates of Samuel Snow's first letters. So this is his first 2 letters. And the publication of that letter connected with its writing date, the 22nd of November, and being published December 7th. We can see that these are all tying together, all these little threads, tying together significant dates from biblical history, from Millerite history, and from American history, right? December 7th. And then we're going to have his third letter, which is not marked on this line. And the reason it's not marked on this line is because it's in May 11th, 1843. And that wouldn't fit on this line, because what I have written here is on this center strip is the Hebrew months, Tishri, Heshvan, Kislev, Tevet, Shevet, Adar, Vadar. So if I was going to put, these just happen to group nicely at the end of 1842. But this 1843 letter, if it was in May, I would have had to put it over here in Nisan, and that would have been a bit confusing because this is 1844. So I just didn't put it on the line, but it's written down here. Now, the restoration of Israel is the topic of this letter. And so this is going to be the next one, the third letter. Now, here, the topic being the restoration of Israel. Is this connected with all of his other dates and the significance of them? That is, all these other dates are dealing somewhat with Israel. This one, the date May 11th, doesn't have significance that I know of. It's the 5th month, the 11th day. And it doesn't give a date when he wrote it. So it just says it's from Samuel Snow. It's published in the Midnight Cry, May 11th, 1843. Now, he's going to be looking at the 16th chapter of Ezekiel, the 46th, the 53rd, the 55th, and the 61st verses. Jerusalem is thus addressed, and thine elder sister is Samaria, and she and her daughters that dwell at thy left hand, and thy younger sister that dwelleth at thy right hand is Sodom and her daughters. When I shall bring again their captivity, and the captivity of the Sodom and her daughters, and the captivity of Samaria and her daughters, then I will bring again the captivity of thy captives in the midst of them. When thy sister Sodom and her daughters shall return to their former estate, and Samaria and her daughters shall return to their former estate, then thou and thy daughters shall return to your former estate. Then thou shalt remember thy ways and be ashamed, when thou shalt receive thy sisters, thine elder and thy younger, and I will give them unto thee for daughters, but not by thy covenant. Now, when we studied Ezekiel, if you can remember that far back, what is this about? This 16th chapter of Ezekiel. This one is a pretty graphic chapter, Ezekiel 16, and it's about the whoredom of Israel, where God had saved them. He called them out of, the land of their nativity, and he's going to dress them up. A lot of these symbols have to do with, the prosperity that he's given them spiritually, but they're going to play the whore, right? But then there's going to be this the Lord's everlasting covenant, right? Nevertheless, I will remember my covenant with thee in the days of thy youth, and I will establish unto thee an everlasting covenant. Then thou shalt remember thy ways and be ashamed when thou shalt receive thy sisters. And I will establish my covenant with thee, and thou shalt know that I am the Lord. So God is going to establish a covenant with these people that wandered away from him. So what is the significance of that? How did we apply Ezekiel 16 in our study? Anybody remember? And this covenant, what is this covenant being likened unto?
More like a marriage covenant.
Yeah, it's a marriage covenant, right? So that's how it's being shown. God is using this illustration, and Ezekiel, and it's a very graphic illustration. It's meant to stir them up, to make them recognize what they have done. But it's also God's promises. That is, He's going to renew a covenant with them, and we know that covenant, of course, is going to be this everlasting covenant. And that's going to be the new covenant, which doesn't necessarily mean the original children of Israel. A lot of people take it that way because we have these symbols of these nations. And we have Samaria, right, being mentioned. Samaria is a representation of Protestantism. But what about Sodom and her daughters? What would that be a representation of? Because you got Sodom and her daughters and Samaria and her daughters. So who's Sodom?
The world.
Okay, the world.
King of the South. Something.
Right. So Sodom, we look at Sodom in Egypt, right? So this is, and we're using the worst example. We could also, include in that, we could include the papacy with Sodom. Could we not?
Yeah, you could.
Yeah. Because these are the two, we have Sodom, which is not God's people. And then we have Samaria that was God's people. It's Israel, Ephraim. And God's going to restore these people from these, we could liken Sodom to Babylon if we wanted to as well. And then Samaria representing Protestantism. So however we'd want to look at that. But I would think that this is talking about what we're talking about at the end, where there are going to be people called out of there's going to be a captivity that's returned, that not everyone, but some of those people will be saved in spite of the fact that they've wandered away from God. So this is in Samuel Snow's letter what is the significance that we would take to this letter regarding the restoration of Israel, that he's writing about this restoration of Israel. Now, there's, and in here he's going to state that basically that it's not about literal Jews. He is not a Jew who is one outwardly. The children of the flesh are not the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted for the seed. So, which is part of what he's talking about. He's showing that this restoration of Israel is not a restoration of literal Israel. Now, remember, Sister Minor, she's going to be caught up in the opposite view of this. And this kind of reminds me again of Parminder and Tess. Does Parminder teach lots of things that are true that he just totally backtracks on? He just does a 180. So even though Snow believes some things that are true, and Sister Minor is following Snow, she's going to backtrack on this. She's going to look at literal Israel as significant, which is something that the Millerites didn't teach. And then we have, this is the tabernacle at New Year's Eve. So this is the Boston Tabernacle. This is Samuel Snow's, it's 1843. That is, it's going to be published in the Signs of the Times, February 28th, 1844, and also in the Midnight Cry on March 7th, 1844. But he's just telling the story of how he came to be a Millerite. And it's on New Year's Eve. So it's on the last day of the year 1843. And remember, it's going to be the next day that he decides that he's going to tell of his belief that Jesus is coming in the fall. Now, I'm just going to read a little bit here. He says, in the autumn of 1840, I united with the Congregational Church, but there was something that whispered to me that I was not doing right. But there being in the place where I resided no other church, I united with them, but I felt it was wrong, for it carried its influence against the Advent faith, which I loved and cherished. And I continued a member till last fall, when I felt my duty to recede. Now, what had happened in the last fall? This is 1843. What happened in the fall of 1843? You'll see it here. He says, in the year 1842, I felt it my duty to go out and preach the truth of my Lord Jesus Christ to the world. I felt that the period of man's probation on earth would terminate in 1843, yet I was unwilling to preach it, but preach the near coming of Christ. But my works, and I have to scroll back up here. My works were not blessed. In East Kingston at a camp meeting, I came out for the first time and laid all down upon the altar before God and consecrated myself to God from that time forever. Since that time, I've been laboring in the vineyard of my Heavenly Father. I left my family and I've been preaching without purse or scrip, and I feel that when the blessed time shall come, I shall have a few souls to present at least as stars in my crown of rejoicing. So in the fall of 1843, you're going to have this, which influenced Snow greatly, is that Christ may come back in the fall of 1843 in connection with the 10th day of the 7th month. So, so his testimony here, and there's a note here where he says that he came out, that is, he started to preach, he laid everything out. It says here from the autobiography of Joseph Bates, page 263, after some discussion on the subject, it was voted unanimously to have 300 similar to this one lithograph. So it's going to be talking about the 43 charts. So I think this is part of what was happening, and this is this camp meeting that he's referring to. So Snow, of course, is caught up in the Millerite movement. And as you get these charts and you get this date in the fall, he's going to really start focusing on proclaiming the message. So he's completely caught up in the message. So that was his presentation that was done then. Now, in May of 1840, I always say it's in May of 1843. It's published in May of it's written in May of 1843, May 3rd, 1843. And it's published in the Signs of the Times, May 17th, 1844. So this is William Miller. And this was the one we looked at where he uses these ideas from the fall types that they must be fulfilled with the second advent, as the spring types were fulfilled with the first advent. So I think it's it's the one thing that really influenced Samuel Snow. And so go back to our diagram. So there is his 9th day of the 10th month, December 31st, 1843. Now, I'm just going to look this up here quickly. So just excuse me. So in 1843, December 31st, according to so I have there the date, the 9th day of the 10th month. That's the same date I have according to the calendar converter. But I'm just going to check this here. I'll just show you what I do here. So I'll share the screen here. So I'm just going to check this date. I don't know if I've checked it at all. So this is the TorahCalendar.com. And it has this, and many of you have seen this, where I can look at the new moon in any particular year. So I'm going to go to 1843. And I'm going to look at the start of the 10th month. And the 10th month here is going to be Friday, December 22nd is going to be the sighting of the new moon. So that means the first day would be to September 23rd. And so if you go 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. So the 9th day of the 10th month is December 31st, 1843. So I just wanted to check that date. Now, the reason I wanted to check that date is the first day of the first month in 1844, what date would it be? If the 31st is the 9th day of the 10th month, what would be the first day of the first month? Or the first day of the 10th, the first day of the first month, that is January 1st, 1844 is what date on the biblical calendar? I just want to see if you guys are awake. So if the 9th day of the 10th month is December 31st, January 1st, 1844 is what biblical date?
10th day of the 10th month.
The 10th day of the 10th month. And what's the significance of the 10th day of the 10th month? The biblical significance. If we go to Ezekiel, chapter 24, on the 9th, in the 9th year of, that's Zedekiah's reign, in the 10th month, in the 10th day of the month, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, write thee the name of the day, even of this same day. The king of Babylon set himself against Jerusalem this same day. So this is when the siege begins. It's going to end a year and a half later on the 9th day of the 4th month. But here it's on the 10th day of the 10th month that the siege begins. So the fact that Samuel Snow on the first day of the first month on our calendar, that is January 1st, 1844, decides that he's going to begin proclaiming the message that Christ is going to return in the fall and not in the spring of 1844, what would be the significance of it being the 10th day of the 10th month that he makes this decision? And also being the first day of the first month. Any ideas?
I think we both had a very long day yesterday, and I'm not really tracking yet.
Okay. So we know the 10th day of the 10th month is the siege. Now, is Samuel Snow compared to Ezekiel?
He can be, yes.
Okay. Now, remember, Ezekiel, he writes of the start of the siege. He doesn't write of the destruction of Jerusalem, at least the date. He does, because during that time when the siege begins, he's mute, right? He's not going to be prophesying against Jerusalem.
Right.
Okay. And it's not going to be until the day that the siege, that he has somebody who comes from the day of the siege until he has a person come and telling him that he saw with his own eyes the destruction of Jerusalem. He's going to be mute that whole time. So it's a period of about 2 years that he's not going to be prophesying against Jerusalem. But Samuel Snow, on the 10th day of the 10th month, he's going to be prophesying, right? He's going to begin his message. He picks up where Ezekiel has left off in that period of time. So there's this parallel between Snow and Ezekiel that is kind of like a mirror. Now, the other thing is we have the 10th day of the 10th month and the first day of the first month. Just those numbers alone, what does that tell us about numbers?
Beyond their significance in our movement.
Well, what about the number 0? Can we get rid of the 0 and see the 10th day of the 10th month as the first day of the first month?
Symbolically, yes.
Yeah. In Millerite history, the 10th day of the 10th month on the biblical calendar is the first day of the first month on the Gregorian calendar. And that's a significant date. And for Snow, January 1st is his first day of the first month. For the Millerite movement, April 19th is the first day of the first month, because that's going to be their first disappointment. But Snow has already decided that he's going to be preaching that they're going to be disappointed on the first day of the first month, because Jesus isn't coming back that date. On that date, he's coming back in the fall on the 10th day of the 7th month. Snow is not disappointed on April 19th. Can we see that connection? That these dates dealing with Snow are significant, even prior to the publication of his letters.
Well, if Snow is going to typify Ezekiel, we'd better be able to see something like this.
Yeah, and he's also typifying this movement. So our movement has to have these types of dates connected to it. But in each of these histories, things are the same, but they're different. That is, the symbols are there, but they express themselves differently. We're not looking for a person in this movement to be Snow. And we never should have ever been looking for somebody to be Samuel Snow, because this movement is Snow. And we can see that as we start to look at these parallels between Millerite history and our history. They need to match. And the problem with what Parminder was teaching regarding the lines is we saw nothing like it in Millerite history. But we can look at Millerite history and see quite clearly that our history does parallel Millerite history. And that Samuel Snow is this movement. But he's going to have two aspects to him. He's going to have the alpha and the omega aspect. And we saw that manifest in our movement. Now, when we talk about the lines, because people have been asking me about some of the things on the lines about 2014 and 2017 and so forth, we have a division that happened in the movement. But Parminder and Tess's division is not part of that. Not directly. That is, their division is something that we would have to look at as the division that happens with Snow himself. That is, when we look at, so remember, we laid these out. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here, and I'm not going to go through detail through reading Samuel Snow's letters. But we know that he writes his first letter, February 16th. It's published on the 22nd. That's the dedication of the temple date, the third day of the 12th month. And the third day of the 12th month, the significance there in 515 BC is that it's an inversion of itself. March 12th is the third month, 12th day, instead of the third day, 12th month. And that's the significance of that was noticed pretty early on by me. Definitely by 2015, if not, I think it was actually 2014 that I first noticed that. So I had this understanding that that date was significant, that symbol. Now it's February 22nd that it's published, which is, of course, that dedication date, but it's going to be republished on the Passover date. So that ties Ezra 6:15 and Ezra 6:19 together. And then, of course, we know that's not the true Passover in 1844. It's the 14th day of the 13th month on the true biblical calendar, even though the Jews and the Karaites observed the Passover on April 3rd in 1844. And then we have the 19th of April, the first day of the first month, the first disappointment. And it's followed by the true Passover on May 2nd. So it's roughly in the center of those two Passovers. And the May 2nd one, of course, is the publication of Snow's second letter, which is the midst of the week. Christ crucified in the midst of the 70th week in 31 AD. Now, we have these two Passovers, the false and the true, and the first day of the first month. What groups are being separated by these two Passovers? Who is being separated from whom?
The wheat from the tares.
Okay, the wheat from the tares, but just literally in Millerite history, who's being separated?
Millerites and Protestants.
Right, so the Millerites and the Protestants are being separated. Now, when we deal with Parminder and Tess, is that a separation of Millerites and Protestants?
That would be a kindly way of putting it.
Yeah, it's not. It's a separation that happens within this final group, so to speak. And we could take Parminder and Tess and their separation as connected to what happens December 6th as well. That is, it's a separation that happens later. Now, in 2014 and 2017, we had some groups that attached themselves to this movement, Path of the Just and these other groups. When they left, wouldn't they be more akin to okay, what would they be akin to? How would we look at the difference, let's put it this way, between these first groups that left and Parminder and Tess? So we're looking at our movement 2014, 2017, those separations that occurred. How is that different?
You're referring to alpha and omega apostasy?
So that wouldn't be alpha and omega apostasy. That's what I'm trying to say, is that what happened in 2014 and 2017 is the separation that we would mark by the true Passover and the false Passover, Protestants and Millerites. But wouldn't the separation that happened with Parminder and Tess, as I stated a bit earlier, be more akin to the separation that happens within Snow himself? So the question that I have, so maybe not everybody's going to be able to follow this thought, but the first day of the first month, we take as being November 9th, correct?
Correct.
And July 18th as July 18th. That is July 18th, 1844, we line up with July 18th, 2020.
Right.
So these are the two dates that we have. But they aren't within this movement itself, they aren't 9/11, because we also put 9/11 as April 19th. So that means we have 9/11 representing, or the first day of the first month, April 19th, representing 9/11 on some kind of line, right? And we also have it representing November 9th. We have it representing two different things. Can we see that for Snow, that first day of the first month shows this separation that's happening within this movement under the alpha and the omega separation? That is, it's something within Snow himself, this fanaticism and the truth sort of mixed together in one person, mixed together in one movement. But that when we deal with the first day of the first month, we actually have other applications that we can put it as sunset. So we can take 2014 as sunset, we can apply it that way. We can also put it as 9/11 itself, separating SDA's and Levites line. But I would still put more what happened with these groups that left in 2014 and 2017 as being just Protestants who did not come and accept the light of the midnight cry. That is, they're not going to be there when we have November 9th and July 18th being predicted, right? So they're separated out of the movement prior to this. So those would be the false priests. April 3rd, that's their Passover. They don't accept the chronology at all. But then you have a group that does accept the chronology. That's the May 2nd Passover. But those people have a separation that happens as well. And that separation is going to happen with July 18th. Now in Snow's line, remember, his July 18th is typifying October 22nd, 1844. So the priests within Millerite history are Snow, and they were being typified. Snow was typifying the bigger line, and we are typifying the bigger line. That is, this movement, which I've been saying long before July 18th, is typical. That is, it's not real. That is, the time setting that we have been doing is typical time setting. We could not predict the close of probation. We could not predict any events on the big line or even on the line of the Levites. That is, we couldn't predict where midnight and the midnight cry are going to fall. Doesn't mean that after they happen, we can't analyze them and see that our dates and structures showed them. We just can't predict them. So the typical nature of this movement is the real problem that this movement has had. In order for us to understand this movement, we need to understand Samuel Snow and the significance of his dates and his letters, because these are the things that speak to us. Now, for Snow then, when is midnight? When is midnight in 1844?
July
July
21st.
21.
Yeah, so July 21, 3 days after July 18th. And what is the 3 days a symbol of? Where have we found the 3 days?
Oh, Ezra.
Right, in Ezra, we have 3 days mentioned 3 times. 3 days
Yeah.
at the river Ahava, 3 days after they arrive in Jerusalem, 3 days before the 20th day of the 9th month. And our line is coming up to the 20th day of the 9th month, the December 25th. And so is the 3 days that call to Jerusalem to get rid of the strange wives, is that July 18th to December 25th, 2021? July 18, 2020 to December 25th, 2021. Is that 3 days?
I would think you could look at it that way.
Yeah, I think we have to look at it. We're in that 3 days, and we're at the end of that 3 days. Now, midnight to us, as it was to Snow, is the proclamation of a message. It's not the empowerment of it. It's the proclamation of it. And that means this movement must have its message in about, 11 days time? What's the date? Today. It's the 15th today. So 10 days time. We have to know what our message is. And that message will be proclaimed not on any specific date, because as far as I'm concerned, I don't think that we can predict any dates. We just are given this time as a witness to this movement, and we have to know what it is we need to proclaim. And I think it's evident from everything that we studied that part of what we have to proclaim is the light that came from the study of the prophecies prior to the giving of a proclamation of time in this movement. That is, we had all of this foundation laid in this movement regarding dates, the chiasms, the prophetic mirrors, Pentecost, and the Day of Atonement in 457 BC. The line of the Millerites, Samuel Snow's letters, the story of Joseph, the understanding of the book of Esther, the understanding of the book of Ezekiel, the understanding of Josiah Litch's prophecy. All of these things were given to us prior to any proclamation of November 9th or July 18th. And what God has allowed us to see is that these things have unfolded before our eyes. The truthfulness of what was discovered regarding the scriptures, regarding the prophetic periods, the 2520 itself, 9/11, the parallels of history, all of these things are our message. Our message is not based on time. That is, we don't predict a date that then is going to empower this message. It's not like if we get the right date one of these days for some event to happen, then this message is vindicated. These dates were given for us as a witness, not for the world as a witness. And it's the understanding of the past that is to be our message. And if we miss out on that, if we dismiss this, we dismiss the foundation for why we came to July 18th in the first place, we will eventually reject July 18th. I think it should be pretty easy to see that people who are caught up in the speculative types of theories regarding the pandemic, regarding various dates that we can look at in the future, people that are caught up in that will eventually lose interest when the things that they're expecting to happen don't happen.
And they'll be disappointed.
Right.
Disappointment.
Right. And the thing that's going to keep us is not what we see happening right now, even though those things can sort of stir us up. You know, we can see that many people with the pandemic are taking Adventism a little more seriously than they would have if nothing was happening in the world. But once the pandemic is gone and all the fears that they had are not realized, are they not just going to go back to sleep? Because what is it that sustains us? What is it that gives us faith and hope and confidence in the scriptures? Is it what we see happening around us today?
Seeing how God leads.
Yeah, and it would be the past, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, Alpha Omega, yeah.
Right. When we look back at the past, when we look at the prophecies, when we look at the foundation of Adventism, when we look at Millerite history, it's those things that are going to sustain us, not what we see with our eyes at present, because those things are changeable. We don't know exactly how things are going to unfold. And when we think that we do, and they don't happen to our expectations, human nature is such that if we're not founded in the past, that we lose hope in the present. So this movement hasn't been very different from the world to a large degree. And that's been manifest by all the apostasies that have occurred. Even the movement itself, and the reason why I attach the movement itself to the apostasy of Parminder and Tess, aren't they the same? Didn't what happened on December 6th, weren't they just reiterating exactly everything Parminder and Tess were saying about prophecy?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. They may felt that they were different than Parminder and Tess, and they could have bragged that they were different, and they never got caught up in that error because they're conservatives and Parminder and Tess are liberals. And so that kind of held them, that kind of disguised, at least to their own minds, that they weren't very different. But they had the same skepticism and the same foundation, really, that Parminder and Tess had.
The liberal mind usually is skepticism and always changing.
Yeah. But just because somebody is a conservative politically, I mean, to me, that was why many people didn't follow Parminder and Tess, wasn't because they weren't the same. They were actually much the same, but they just politically were different. If they had been liberals, they would have followed Parminder and Tess. They just happened to be conservatives. And the younger people tended to follow because they tend to be more liberal. The older people tend to be more conservative. So people were proud of the fact that they didn't fall into the trap that what Parminder and Tess were teaching, but they didn't they didn't follow it for the right reasons. I mean, the reasons that they rejected Parminder and Tess's teaching was things like, well, they're saying we should be watching CNN. And of course, these were Fox people, right? They supported Trump. They didn't like Obama, right? Nothing wrong. I'm not saying that you should like one or the other. I mean, obviously, I would be much more conservative. I'm definitely not a liberal in that sense politically, but I'm not really political anyway. But as far as the values of conservatism, I would be conservative. But that's not a good reason to reject. Just rejecting Parminder and Tess for that reason is not enough. You'd have to understand prophetically and doctrinally what they were doing that was wrong.
I don't think it was just politically.
No, I don't think it was just politically, but I would say for some people that was the main reason. That's what I'm saying. Is that for some people they couldn't discern spiritually, but it's just that Parminder and Tess were such different political persuasions that they could easily dismiss them without understanding what was happening spiritually. And even for some people, it would be jealousies and things that would cause them not to follow Parminder and Tess. That is, if you had aspirations, to be in the movement, and now you see Parminder and Tess taking a position that you don't like, well, then you're going to that you think you should have. Well, that would be reason not to follow them as well. But that same spirit is going to continue even as the movement continues. The same jealousies will arise with others. So you can see it's not enough to be motivated to make the right decision if you have the wrong motives. Just because somebody becomes a Sabbath keeper doesn't mean that person is converted and that they're going to be able to stand the Sunday law test. Because they could be a Sabbath keeper for completely the wrong reason. Maybe they just like things that are different. They like to have people criticize them. They like to be people in opposition to them. They like controversial topics. And they'll jump from one controversial topic to another when it suits them. I've seen this happen hundreds of times, so I'm not going to exaggerate. I know many, many, many people who became Adventists for the wrong reason, and they're still following some kind of other controversial topic. Maybe even they don't keep the Sabbath anymore, or maybe they became lunar Sabbatarians, or they became feast keepers, or they became some kind of conspiracy theorists, became messianics, all kinds of different things that I know people personally who started off accepting Adventism, but for the wrong reason. And some even stay Adventists, but they have peculiar ideas. They like to be controversial. And that's not why we're following this movement. It shouldn't be, but it's why many did join it. And maybe even we have that in us. And God is trying to correct it and remove it out of us.
So different motives to joining.
Yeah. And why we're in this movement now, why we accept July 18th. I mean, it could be a matter of pride for many people, why they still say they believe in July 18th. It could be just, our friends accept it and I want to be a part of this group. But none of those things will help us stand.
It should be evidence Evidence should be it.
Yeah, and it can't be emotional. It can't be sentimental.
It has to be just evidence, yeah.
It has to be evidence. And it has to be a faith that is tested and tried. And the question is, has our faith been tested and tried? And are we going to learn the things that we need to learn? Now, so we've got just a few minutes. So I just want you to look at some of these dates in here in Samuel Snow's letters. So just to remind you of these things. So I have 5 letters, not 4, listed. Letter 2 is the letter about the mockers, and I don't include it in Samuel Snow's letters. But I'm not saying that I couldn't. That is, I could have included it up. I didn't put it up here. I didn't put it right next to May 2nd because the numbers would be difficult there. But we have this May 2nd, his second letter. And the day before, in the Signs of the Times, is this letter that's published. And it's May 1st. It's the 13th day of the first month. So it's the day before the Passover. And this date, the significance of it, the significance of this letter is that it doesn't fit in with the structure. That is, we don't have, it's not the May 2nd is the center of a chiasm. But I would argue that the May 1st and the May 2nd letter do go together. That is, I believe that they're part of the same. This is marking the end, because this is really dealing with the disappointment. Remember, he's dealing with the mockers. Now, what is it about Samuel Snow about April 19th? Did he expect Jesus to come back then? Or April 18th, I guess, would be the last day of Miller's prophecies. So Snow is not disappointed, but he's going to write a letter that addresses the mockers. And the mockers is an important topic. What is it about the mockers? Where's the mocking happening? Anybody know what I'm talking about?
Those that were saying that Miller's predictions could not come to pass.
Okay. Now, where's the mocking first happen?
During 1842.
Okay, but I'm talking about just in the history of the world. Prophetically, biblically.
At the flood.
So we have it at the flood. Is there any time before that we have mocking? I can't think of any right now, but I would put the mocking at the flood.
You'd also have to think that there would be some mocking during Enoch's time.
Yeah, but not mentioned specifically.
Correct.
Yeah. And I don't think I would put Cain and Abel. I don't know if I would put mocking there, other than maybe you could say somewhat. I'm not my brother's keeper is a bit of a mocking thing, but we have marked it prophetically. So where do we mark the mocking? Stephen might know. Anybody know what the mocking is about?
I would almost think that the mocking would be the pride of those that don't wish to study.
Okay. Now we in Millerite history, we put the mocking because Snow is marking the mocking. He's mocking it at the first disappointment. Now, we also have mocking that happens in the story of Ishmael and Isaac. So what is the mocking there?
Ishmael and Isaac would be, here's a child just weaned from its mother and being compared to that of, what is it, a 13-year-old?
Yeah, something like that. I can't remember how old. Yeah, I think it's 13.
No, I think he's 19.
19, is that what it is?
Yeah, he was. I think he was, or 18 or something. He
Okay.
was 14 years old when Isaac was born.
Okay. So anyway, he's
So
in
5
his
years,
late
he'd
teens.
be 19.
Yeah, so late teens. Now, we also have a mocking that is Genesis 36, verse 8. So we're going to probably have to pick up some of this stuff later. Anyway, regarding Esau or Edom, there's a mocking that goes on regarding Esau. So Jacob and Esau also have a mocking attached with them, where Jeff does a study on that. So all I'm trying to say here about the May 1st letter is it's attached to the end of Miller's periods. That is, Snow is going to mark it. And then after the first disappointment, that's his first thing that he does. But the next thing he does is what we call his second letter. That is his second letter in the line of the 4 letters, not the line of the 5 letters. But I put the first and the second together. To me, they kind of are tied together because one is marking the end of Miller's prophecies, and May 2nd is now establishing, after the first disappointment, the message of the midst of the week, which is tied to this structural chiasm of his letters. That is, it's the center of a chiasm. When he's writing about a chiasm, it's published on the day of Passover, and it's about the Passover in 31 AD. And it goes back to his first letter in 1844, which is talking about the first one that talks about Christ coming back on the 10th day of the 7th month. And that's going to create this chiasm that ends in July 18th. So all of these letters are significant, even the May 1st letter. It's just generally we don't draw it on the line. So we're going to close now. And what we will do tomorrow, so we're going to finish off Samuel Snow's letters tomorrow and look at the July 18th letter a little bit more closely, and also the Pentecost letter, and the prophetic chronology and the true midnight cry. And we're going to see the significance of the dates and how this ties together to this movement at the present time. At least we're going to try to do our best. And one of the things that's come out when in reading about the restoration of Israel is he's talking about the covenant. And this becomes a significant part of Snow's message. But he has some errors. And the first error is the exaltation of himself. That is, he believes he's a prophet. And then the other thing is his misunderstanding of the covenant. So he actually doesn't understand the covenant. He also has some chronological problems that he holds on to. Even though he still accepts October 22nd, 1844, after the disappointment, and accepts the evidences that he brought to the table to prove October 22nd, 1844, he has basically abandoned a lot of the message. And so this has to be something that this movement has to take into account. And we have to examine ourselves. Are we in the faith or no? Are we going to follow in the way of Samuel Snow? Or are we going to follow in the way of the Millerites who accepted not just October 22nd, 1844 as a date, but the significance of the event that occurred then? That's what we have to decide for ourselves. So let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful. We're thankful to be in this movement and to be at this time in Earth's history, to see your amazing power, to see things that angels have longed to look into. But we know, Lord, that we are sinners, that there is nothing that commends us to you except our great need of you. So we ask for forgiveness. We ask that you can use us in spite of ourselves, that you can give us that love that Moses had for Israel when he said, blot my name out of the book. I pray for each person watching these studies. I pray for the people who have participated. You know, Lord, that there is a test before us that goes so contrary to our nature, that reveals who we really are, whether we're in you, whether we're in Christ or not. Help us, Lord, to see these things. Be with us throughout this day. We ask for your care and protection. May your angels watch over us, and may you bring us together again to study your word, is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.